Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Hello and welcome to Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys. My name is Hunter. In this podcast, I'll be joined by a different guest each week to discuss a classic Western movie or TV show. I've been a fan of classic Westerns for as long as I can remember, and in recent years, they've become very nostalgic for me. I love the aesthetic, the tropes, and I love seeing different filmmakers' takes on them. At their best, they're incredibly entertaining, rewatchable, and some of my all-time favorite movies are Westerns. We'll mostly focus on Western movies made in Hollywood, but we'll also be covering spaghetti Westerns, and one thing I'm very excited to get into are Western TV shows. I've got some amazing guests coming on the show, film professors, historians, and podcasters. And Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys is part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, and many guests on the show will be from other shows on the network. Thanks for listening.
And welcome to the Kulturecast. I'm Chris Stachiw, and I am joined by the one and only Mr. Pipes, Eric Kniss.
Every time you do one of these openings, I always forget that it's going to happen, and then it happens, and I'm caught off guard, and I don't know what to say.
Oh, God, look at him. He's in the reflection. I saw his face. The cat scratched out his eyes.
Oh, jeez.
And we are also joined by the host of the award-winning, world-renowned Projection Booth podcast, the one and only Mr. Mike White.
Wow, this is definitely fiction.
This is real. The lines are lining up. They're calling in to tell us it's all a lie.
Jeez, he's really bringing us up. Is what's happening. We need to have you on more often.
I'm bringing you guys up with the power of positivity. And so we are continuing Horrortober with a look at the critically acclaimed, controversial, not here but overseas, 1992's Ghostwatch.
On Saturday night, we'll be visiting the most haunted house in Britain. But will the ghosts be there? Can you take it?
Ghostwatch, a Screen One special for Halloween, Saturday at 9:25 on One.
Ghostwatch was created and written by Stephen Volk, directed by Lesley Manning. It stars, playing themselves for the most part, Michael Parkinson, Sarah Green, Mike Smith, Craig Charles, and Gillian Bevan playing Dr. Lynn Pass. Ghostwatch centers around a mockumentary found footage reality horror TV program where Michael Parkinson, who was very big in Britain at the time, he was a TV show host, had a team go out to a haunted house, and he hosted it from the studio with a parapsychologist played by Gillian Bevan. So, Mike, kicking it to you. I know you had never seen it, but I know you'd wanted to see it. So what did you think of Ghostwatch?
I thought it was very effective. I really enjoyed it. There were a lot of moments where I was very tense and wasn't necessarily scared, but was very tense. I found the pacing to be very interesting, and I felt kind of bad because going back and reading the trivia notes about the movie, they said that you could actually see Pipes, the creature in this. I never saw anything, so I feel kind of like a dumbass.
Well, the first time I watched it, I didn't catch it either. So you're not alone by any account. So I am curious though, Eric, the first time you watched it, did you see the ghost at all?
I saw, there's the one shot where they go and they're in the girl's bedroom or whatever, and you can see Pipes is standing there in the curtains, but they have him colored exactly the same as the curtains. And they do he's just sweeping out of the room like he's leaving, and you just see this person standing there up against the curtains, and then he goes back and there's nothing there anymore. But there's like the one shot where like you could see his face and stuff, and I had to go back and find it afterwards.
Yeah, the one that I really like, again, I didn't see it the first time I watched it, but the one that I think is the most effective for me is at 30 minutes in, 30 seconds, where you see him behind them in the studio when they're playing the possessed voice and the studio goes dim and then and you can kind of see a face in the background and the studio lights back up and no one's there. I thought that was really effective. I do agree with Mike though. This is it's an interesting piece of kind of entertainment because it's found footage, kind of. I mean, it is found footage, but it's also very much a mockumentary. So it kind of straddles the line, which we talked about with the conspiracy. Let me redo that. We talked about with the conspiracy, when these found footage horror films kind of tread two lines or really go after two different styles, that's when they're more interesting rather than just, oh, this is just a camera that we found in the woods. Where did the kids go? Or we set up a camera in our bedroom. Look out for the scary ghosts. And so that's what I think one of the most effective things about Ghostwatch is it mixes the medium to try and create a sense of realism that a lot of things kind of don't go after right off the bat.
No, yeah, I agree. I really like the formatting of it, and I really like the pacing of it, because they take so long to get to like the stuff that actually happens. It really makes it more believable. Like it feels like a real broadcast for the whole first hour of it. Like it would just be like, I don't know, like any other one of these like style shows from the early 90s. It could have been Unsolved Mysteries, like just like the British version. It's very believable the way that they have it set up, with the TV crew and everything like that. And then, I mean, the ending gets like a little bit hokey, but I mean, for the time or whatever. And I don't know, it's cool. It's interesting, and it's totally different than anything I've ever seen, which is amazing. And I'm sort of surprised that like nobody's tried to like ape this format in the last like 30 years.
Well, there are things like Special Bulletin, where it takes place when there's a nuclear strike, and it was right around that time of like the day after, and Threads and these like threats of nuclear war, and that was shot like it was a TV broadcast, but not this kind of thing. Like this whole idea of the ghost hunting and all this stuff, I think this is really super effective. As I was watching this movie, I kept thinking of the night when Geraldo went into Al Capone's vault. That like huge build up to absolutely nothing, and it was just like one of the biggest jokes to ever happen, and I'm surprised that the guy ever managed to maintain his position in the industry after that, because it was just such a laugh. And this could have gone that way, obviously, if this was like a real thing and they never saw any ghosts or anything spooky. It kind of reminds me of the few, and I mean very few, ghost hunter shows that I've seen where it's all this like horseshit of, oh, I heard a noise. Oh, there's definitely presence in here, and this kind of stuff.
Oh, he's going after Zach Bagans, guys. Zach Bagans, you're on fucking blast.
But luckily, something actually happens here, and I like that they set it up like a narrative at times, like, oh, here's this infrared camera, and here's this thing, and here's this thing, and that they work those back in, I mean, which is pretty typical, right? Like, oh, I'll see that again in the third act, but it's nice the way that they introduce these things as part of the broadcast.
And the thing about it, obviously, is watching it, in 2018 or when I saw it last year in 2017, it's 25 years removed from when this was aired in the UK. And, if you don't know a lot about Ghostwatch aired one time, and that's it. Because what ended up happening was people didn't catch the beginning of it or didn't realize that it was a narrative, and they thought it was real, similarly to the War of the Worlds broadcast by Orson Welles. And they were calling into the number because, of course, they put a number on the screen. Again, stroke of genius, absolute stroke of genius. And, it blew up the phone lines. There were people in the newspaper the next day. The newspapers were covering it. Everyone was pissed. And BBC never showed it again because it was such a controversial piece of entertainment. And, I can only imagine what that must have been like to watch it live. Because watching it now, it's different. We appreciate.
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Hello, my name is Kevin Tudor, and I'm one of the 3 hosts of Almost Major, a film podcast dissecting many major indie studios and the films they release. Every week, myself, Charlie Nash, and Bryden Doyle discuss overlooked, forgotten, or bona fide classic indie films via studio-specific miniseries. We've previously covered numerous films from Artisan Entertainment, Lionsgate Films, and New Line Cinema. Titles including The Blair Witch Project, American Psycho, Dogville, But I'm a Cheerleader, Saw, Requiem for a Dream, and Ringmaster. The Jerry Springer film. Anyways, we have a fun time every week, and we hope you will join us. Subscribe to Almost Major wherever you get your podcasts. Now proudly a part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
It in a different way than they would have, and then they did, but it's still absolutely one of the best made found footage horror films I've ever seen, because it takes an idea and fully commits to it. And again, Eric, I can understand Eric at the ending maybe not being a huge fan of it, but imagine watching it and that ending being the last thing you saw and not being aware that that's not real.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, it would freak me the fuck out if I was watching it. I'd be like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, and again, I think that's the success of this, is you really kind of have to, it can be enjoyed outside of kind of putting yourself in the mindset of someone in 1992, but at the same time, if you view it from that lens, this just becomes that much more kind of impactful, because there were people that were scared shitless watching this. There were also people that knew it was fake from the get-go, but there were people that thought that this was real. And that's because you didn't have actors playing characters. You had Michael Parkinson playing himself, Sarah Green playing herself. And obviously for a lot of Americans, most Americans, we don't really have any frame of reference as to who Michael Parkinson is. But I would say what's an American analog for Michael Parkinson, like not Stephen King, Larry King?
Larry King, Tom Brokaw. Any of your trusted news sources, I would imagine.
Yeah. And so that's what makes this so effective, is that it does kind of fully commit to this kind of the story that they're telling.
Yeah, and even when it comes to the people who aren't the TV personalities, when it comes to us watching this as Americans, I don't know who these British personalities are necessarily. I know some British TV hosts, but I didn't know these folks, and I just, I was catching jokes like, oh, this guy looks like Abe Edmondson, those kind of things. And okay, I know who that is. I can get some of these Britishisms here. But even when it comes to the people that are professional actors, like our parapsychologists, it's okay, yeah, I don't know who this woman is. So I've seen her in other things. I know that I have by looking up her filmography, but I didn't recognize her right out of the gate. So she seemed as legitimate as anyone else in this, as did the kids, as did the mom. So everybody felt like they were real people, because the real people were playing it straight, and the actors were playing it so well that it really carried through.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody in this felt believable. I didn't think there was a weak chain in any of the acting or anything like that. Even not knowing who these people are, everything felt real. Even though I knew that it was fake going in, everything still felt believable. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing about it that's so crazy, right? Is that it's I don't know. We have talked already about found footage films this month. And we really have picked out some of the better ones because, again, as much as I know that Blair Witch is an important film, I don't think it's aged particularly well, and I'm not a huge fan of it. I know we've already talked about this. But this came before Blair Witch.
Oh, and it seemed to be a definite influence on Blair Witch. Just so many of these, like the little scares, the little touches that they're putting in. I mean, I would be very surprised if the makers of Blair Witch hadn't seen this before. And I remember it being available on DVD maybe mid-90s, being importable, so it is possible.
Well, and that's one of the things that one of the directors of the Blair Witch Project said, we had never seen Ghostwatch before we made Blair Witch. Yeah. Right. I'm not sure I believe that. I mean, look, you could also just skirt the subject and say, well, Blair Witch was inspired by Cannibal Holocaust, because I mean, that was also a big influence on Blair Witch. But, I mean, Ghostwatch is one of those things that really stands alone. I can't really... I mean, you can look at, like, TV programs, but again, like you mentioned, Mike, I mean, this is not reality. This is scripted reality. And so, like, the thing with Geraldo, where he goes in and there's nothing, and oops, an egg on Geraldo's face... End of story, because there is no story, because reality is not nearly as interesting as scripted reality. It's this weird spot where I would love to see something like this again, but I think that the time has passed for something like this to ever work again, right?
Well, and we always complain about, like, oh, we only had so many channels growing up, but we forget that Britain had very few channels, and so this playing on BBC One as opposed to BBC Four was such a big deal, because BBC One was like the trusted source for all this, whereas BBC Four was more like, oh, the experimental type of thing, and they probably could have gotten away with it without this being a national furor on BBC Four, but with this on the channel on BBC One, it was such a scandal. And, you know, we were talking a few months ago on the show about, on the projection booth, about just the approach for British TV versus American TV, especially when it comes to entertainment, and the idea of wanting or being able to scare the hell out of people, especially when it came to kids. Like, British TV shows for kids are so much scarier than American TV for kids. And I would love to see more of their adult-themed horror stuff, because this, you know, they were surprised that kids were up at 9 o'clock watching television. Surprise, surprise. But if this was more adult-themed, I can't even imagine what other adult-themed horror stuff that they might have been showing on the BBC at this time, because this was so scary. But yeah, and again, in that subtle way, like, they really just drag this out, but to a perfect degree. It isn't one of those things where I was just frustrated watching this. I was riveted watching this.
Well, and it's one of those things where, like you've mentioned, like both you and Eric have mentioned, with the length of it and kind of one half of it, or half of it being setup. I mean, half of this, it's an hour and a half long, 45 minutes is setup. And it works in its favor because there is a payoff. The payoff feels completely earned. And again, it's also, one of those things where when you watch it the second time around, or third or fourth or fifth, you do see the ghost, or you pick up on other stuff. Because the first time you watch it, it's kind of jarring. It's that, things just start happening, and, it seems to be pretty fast paced in the last half, and there's a lot of stuff going on. The characters are getting knocked around. Some of the characters disappear. Some of the characters die. And one of the characters ends up, who knows what happens at the end, gets possessed. And so everything kind of happens really quickly at the end. But the more times, I've seen it a fair amount of times now. The more times you watch it, the more stuff you pick up on. And it's just the nuances of it are really what sell it. But the first time you watch it, you don't really pick up on the nuances, but you're cognizant of them, because it's just, this is the way TV is filmed, and that's kind of what is being ingrained in us regardless of the culture. It's the way TV is filmed, and that's what they get so right, and much to their success, they get that so right. So I do want to talk a little bit about there is a documentary out there. Ghostwatch Behind the Curtains, and they talk a little bit about the making of this and kind of the fervor that ended up, like Mike said, that ended up coming out of this. I find it funny that they weren't sure if they wanted to put, created by Stephen Volk at the beginning until they were essentially forced to by the BBC, because they were really worried that this was going to be War of the Worlds. And I find that pretty funny.
The version that I saw, I rewatched it again tonight before we started recording, and it just said like Michael Parkinson in Ghostwatch. There were no opening credits to this. And I was like, okay, I can kind of see if this was how it started, I can kind of see why there was a problem with it. I mean, there are end credits to it. So I was like, okay, this makes sense. But that was that thing where you don't know it's a joke until the end of it. So
you won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Hello, this is Aaron West. I am the author of the A24 New Wave. In this book, I look at A24's output and I make the argument that we are in a new wave movement right now. A24 plays a major role. This book has a supplemental podcast where each episode is a brief conversation about an A24 related topic, whether an actor, director, or even a genre. As I continue research for the book and conduct interviews, I expect to record podcast episodes with people involved with the company. You can find the podcast at cinejourneys.com or wherever you find podcasts, and we are proud to be members of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
I don't know. What was your guys' version like? Did they have the created by Stephen Volk on there?
Yeah, the one on Shudder did.
Okay.
Maybe in the end credits, but not in the beginning.
I sure thought in mine at the beginning it said created by Stephen Volk.
I don't know. There's nothing. I don't think there's anything in the beginning. That's because the Shudder one is the one that I watched.
Or maybe I'm remembering it incorrectly. I sure thought that it has something to that effect where it's like created by. But again, like they did that. They did that because they were worried. Mm-hmm. That what happened was going to happen, and what they were worried about happening did happen, obviously. Which again, I mean, I'm this is something that I've kind of grappled with when talking about and thinking about Ghostwatch. Was that something that was important for it to be successful? That it really get the public's kind of like the public fervor? In your mind, Mike, was that important?
I think so.
For this to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we would still be talking about it as far as, there was this show.
It says at the beginning, it says by Stephen Volk.
Yeah, but it doesn't, that's not like.
I mean, come on. That is a pretty clear sign that someone wrote it, right?
I
don't think it's overt enough.
I think we'd still be talking about this as far as like, hey, there was this show that scared a bunch of people, back in the early 90s. But that it scared a bunch of people with a capital B, and people thought it was real, and then it enters into being almost like an urban legend kind of thing. I think that's the notoriety that they needed to really push them over, because otherwise this might have been just a one-night television event and we wouldn't really still be talking about it.
Well, and they talk about that in that Behind the Curtains documentary. One of the film critics is like, does anyone remember what was aired the week before?
Right.
Or the week after on BBC? And no, because this is one of those things. This is just one of those things that's become, like you said, kind of like the, a BBC boogeyman. It's one of those things where it's it's an urban legend. Should you see Ghostwatch? Or even in 2016, 2 years ago, people were still finding the pipes apparitions in the film. It's 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, I'd be interested, now that we're talking about it, I don't know. Now it makes me, this movie is one of those movies where just watching this movie made me want to watch this movie again. Mm-hmm. And that's like a total testament to its effectiveness and its uniqueness. And the fact that there are pipes, ghosts hidden all over the movie in the background and shit is awesome and super great writing. And I'm sure like during the live broadcast, like some people saw some of those and it freaked them out. Or, you know, or maybe just like the subconscious, you know, like part of your brain, like where you can see it, but you don't really know that it's there. So you don't really see it, you know, maybe that makes the ending more effective or whatever. And like I said, like, you know, parts of the ending to me were pretty hokey, you know, with the cats and all of that stuff. But like, I still get it, and it still fits with the story, and it still fits with the theme and everything that's going on. So, you know, a creative choice that was made is, you know, I don't think it's something that would work now. But, you know, for something where nobody had ever seen anything like this, and they just like drop it on the unsuspecting public. And it was like you said, like the day before this came out, there was essentially what was the British equivalent to like the like a TV guide. Yeah, like came out the day before this aired, and it said that this was a drama in it. But I mean, if not everybody reads the TV guide, not everybody is going to see that. And I don't know, like something like this is great. And I would love to see more things like this, like a one-time only. But I don't even know. Do we know how long after this aired, like it was available on like to rewatch?
So a decade after it came out, the British Film Institute, the BFI, released it on VHS and DVD. In 2011, 101 Films issued a DVD re-release, but mind you, none of these are the BBC releasing it. In 2016, okay, so 2 years ago, BBC finally made it part of their collection on their website that you could purchase it. 24 years?
Jeez.
That's a long time. That's a really long time to kind of, you know, blacklist this little this docudrama into the ground because people got so upset about it.
Damn.
I mean, can you imagine if Orson Welles never worked again because of War of the Worlds? You know, but you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of similar.
Yeah, but no, instead he parlayed it into a hugely successful film career, at least for one movie.
Right. Make sure we emphasize one movie. F is for fake, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. And, you know, this is another thing about this that I think we kind of have, you know, listening to them talk about it in the documentary, it gives you a better frame of reference. But, you know, when they talk about the people that loved it when it came out, and Stephen Volk and Lesley Manning both talked about this in the interviews that I did with them, it was primarily like teenagers and like kids who really liked it. And it was the adults that were angry that they had kind of gotten duped by it. And I find that hilarious. I find that so funny in the best way.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, they just couldn't handle it, it sounds like.
Right? But that to me is really funny because when you think about it and you think about the way that people are getting kind of like up in arms about it, it's just hilarious. I mean, like we've said, I mean, it feels real within kind of loose constructs, but it's just one of those things where adults getting upset about it that's just great. Well, let's take a break and we'll play the interviews with the screenwriter of Ghostwatch, Stephen Volk, and with the director of Ghostwatch, Lesley Manning, and then some commercials, and we'll finish up talking about it when we get back. Outside of the obvious inspiration of the Enfield haunting, what inspired you to write Ghostwatch?
Well, first of all, it wasn't really directly in response to the Enfield poltergeist that I wrote it. That was one of many cases that I looked at. So I can answer that first of all, if I may, and then get back to the other things that inspired it. Because that's kind of been an accusation that has kind of plagued me through the years. What happened really, that it was a process of evolution that it came to resemble the Enfield haunting, because the Enfield haunting is a peculiarly English family dynamic that is almost an archetypal poltergeist case with a prepubescent female at the center of it, a broken family, dysfunctional family, and a kind of semi-suburban kind of setting. In this case, it was the outskirts of London. But actually, that is probably what mostly makes people think of Enfield. But in fact, in the earlier drafts of the script, it was could have easily been Manchester, Sheffield, loads of places your American listeners will not even have heard of. So it was kind of accidental that it came to resemble the Enfield poltergeist, even though I think because it's archetypal, it was almost bound to.
Well, and the Enfield haunting is a lot more prescient now because of The Conjuring 2 covering it.
Of course,
so.
Yeah. A lot more people kind of know about it. But the thing was, one of the guys that investigated the Enfield case was Guy Lyon Playfair, who I knew, and was one of the foremost people that could actually tell someone firsthand, as he did to me, what it's like to be in a room with things flying around and, for want of a better word, weird shit happening. So he'd already kind of told me that when we were working together on a completely different project, and I actually suggested to the producer of Ghostwatch that they get him in to simply talk to the cast about what it's like to actually...
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
The audio commentary. It's a dying art form, but here at One Track Mind, I, your wonky yet affable host Ryan Luis Rodriguez, analyze film through the prism of these embryonic forms of podcasting, one audio commentary at a time. Masterpieces, crapster pieces, live action, animation, cult classics, films literally no one has ever heard of. No track is too small and no track is too big. Join me and my guests from the entertainment world as we keep these features alive every other Tuesday. Hey, who else is going to discuss Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey one week and Citizen Kane the next? Us, that's who. Sure, you have to put up with my voice, but there's a certain give and take in this industry. That's One Track Mind, part of the Someone's Favorite Productions family and available wherever you get your podcasts.
They live in a haunted house. And true enough, he came along at a small expense because it was a BBC production, so everything's a small expense. And he talked to the actors about what it felt like to be in that house. Conveyed the authenticity that he felt the phenomena, obeyed, that he was observant of. And that was very useful. So he actually got a credit at the end of the program as a consultant, and I think that was another thing that actually misdirected people to think that it was somehow a kind of pernicious version of the Enfield poltergeist, when in fact he was just a contact that I suggested to the production to give a bit of authenticity to the crew, really. So do you want me to go back to what really was going on with the creation?
By all means, go right ahead. By all means.
Well, I was initially gonna really proposing a 6-part serial to BBC drama, a conventional drama that would be made, a supernatural drama that would be made pretty much like any other filmed drama thriller on the BBC. It was called Ghostwatch, but it wasn't the same concept. But it did, in episode 6, have a kind of a reference to a live broadcast from a haunted house, because the concept was a paranormal investigator gets in cahoots with a film crew, investigative film reporters. This was way back in the mid to late 1980s, this concept, I hasten to add. A million things like it have happened since. But anyway, the BBC didn't want to do that. They wouldn't commit to 6-part series, supernatural series. They're very wary of that genre. compared to, say, a crime series. So the producer was sitting in her office, or I was sitting in her office rather, and she said, well, we can't do it as a 6-hour series, but there is a possibility of doing it as a single 90-minute drama. How could we do that? And I said, well, we can't do the 6-hour drama as a 90-minute. That would be preposterous. But what if we did that idea in episode 6, where it's a live broadcast from a haunted house? And I said, as an additional kind of twist, what if we did it like it really is a transmission from a haunted house? And her jaw kind of dropped, and she said, well, do you think we can do that? And I said, well, if you're as excited about the idea as me, let's at least try, So that was really the start of it. And as for my kind of intention, it's going to sound like I knew this going in, but it's with the benefit of 25 years hindsight, to be perfectly honest, that I realized that really my intentions were twofold. And I think it was kind of the subtext of that first meeting I had with the producer. First of all, to do a ghost story for TV that would work on the TV audience and scare them. That was the first thing. We'd both grown up with TV ghost stories. The BBC used to do a ghost story every Christmas. It was kind of a tradition. But that had fallen by the wayside. So I'd always, since a teenager, or before that really, since being a kid in front of the TV set, I've always wanted to do a ghost story for TV. And this was a kind of idea that I thought, I really want to do something that's scary, simple as that will scare the audience, and also get kids or people like me that love the genre talking about it the next day, talking about it when they go into school, and it's recess, and you always talk about the great show that you've seen the night before or that weekend. But the other thing was, I think, implicit in when I was pitching it was, it was kind of implicit that this could also be a bit of a sarcastic critique of the way the media was going. The central kind of gag at the root of Ghostwatch is, what would television do if it could train all its technology on the supernatural, the metaphysical, the great question that humankind has wrestled with for centuries, which is, do we survive death? What would a broadcaster do with that question? And the truth of the matter is, I think, they do it as an entertainment program. They really do it as a base level entertainment, ratings-grabbing show. And I kind of found that a delicious kind of contradiction intellectually, that the most perplexing intellectual question of all time could be reduced to light entertainment. And I thought that is fun. That is kind of a fun contradiction that could also be scary, dramatic, interesting. So those were the two things going through my mind creating it, really.
So you mentioned watching horror as a child, and you're obviously an established horror novelist and a writer. I'm curious, taking one step kind of back even before Ghostwatch, and just as someone who's a writer, who do you draw your influences from as a writer?
Let me think. I loved Richard Matheson. I grew up on the Edgar Allan Poe adaptations he wrote for Roger Corman. I loved his novel I Am Legend. I loved his adaptation of The Devil Rides Out by Dennis Wheatley. So I loved the fact that he was a novelist one minute, a screenwriter the next minute. And people like Robert Bloch also seemed to do that. They'd write a novel for which was made by Hitchcock, like Psycho, but also write those wonderful kind of amicus portmanteau films. So those were the kind of guys that I really not aspired to, because it seemed so absurd to even think it was within reach to do that for a living. But when those names came up on the credits of a show, and me and my compadres in school, we got, being nerds and being horror fanatics, we would observe these names on the credits and kind of catalog their work and that kind of thing long before it became a kind of prime industry. But also I would say that, like I say, there was a series of ghost stories for Christmas that were done on film and very, very creepy, that happened in the early late 60s, early 70s. Very formal influence, really, in the UK on a lot of horror writers. But also there was a writer over here called Nigel Neal who created a character called Quatermass. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it was a very chilling kind of space age. He was a rocket scientist, Quatermass, and he figured in, I think, 3 different serials on the BBC, and then became converted into a Hammer film called Quatermass and the Pit, which was very scary. And he also adapted 1984, the George Orwell novel for the BBC. But in the 70s, I think it was the 70s, he wrote a drama called The Stone Tape, and it went out one Christmas, like the traditional time for ghost stories. But it was a modern dress, it was set in the modern time, and it was about a bunch of effectively BBC technicians working in a unit in an old building that happened to be a haunted house, and they were working on trying to find a new means of communication. But of course it all kind of goes wrong. What they end up doing is kind of dredging up the forces of darkness underneath the history of the house. And that is a specific kind of progenitor of Ghostwatch, because it's about technology with all its smugness descending on the unknown and being unable to unravel it, really. And that's where its disturbing factor kind of comes from, I think. And that's what I love about Nigel Neal. He takes science, but he kind of pits it against almost kind of pagan forces or alien forces, which are kind of unknowable. And it creates a wonderful kind of frisson in the dramas that he writes.
So you mentioned Nigel Neal. I'm curious, for American audiences who have seen Ghostwatch, myself included, I'm curious your thoughts on...
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
If it had any inspiration, if it did kind of incidentally have inspiration, because that's, I feel, is more likely, the Orson Welles War of the Worlds.
Absolutely. I'm not sure I even mentioned it in that first meeting, but I think we both knew what we were talking about, if that makes sense, because it was such an obvious parallel, to actually talk to the public, create a drama for the public audience that pretends to be something else in order to make them think it was really happening. That was kind of understood, and it was both exciting, very exciting, and also a little bit daunting, because none of us had any idea what effect it was going to have, really. We were actually terribly worried it would have no effect at all. That nobody would find it scary, everyone would cotton on to it, nobody would find it interesting, and it would all be completely worthless. But, of course, as you know, it didn't quite work out like that. But at the time when we were making it, the producer was certainly most worried about the news getting out that we were making something that wasn't what we said it was, and someone would, as we say, blow the gaff, and the secret would be out, and And you know, it would be the whole project would be kind of castrated by the news getting out, you know. So we had a kind of false name on the script, that kind of thing, and we swore all the actors to secrecy and that kind of thing, which was fun but nerve-wracking at the time. The Orson Welles broadcast. The other thing, strangely, that influenced our thinking was. In the early 90s, you see, the language of fiction on TV was blurring with the language of non-fiction. If I can explain, you were starting to get TV shows like Hill Street Blues or NYPD Blue that used handheld cameras like documentaries. So drama was, in effect, trying to look like a documentary. And then also it was the kind of foothills of reality TV. So non-fiction programs were starting to use dramatic techniques like having recreations with actors in them. So you had actors appearing in so-called kind of documentaries, and you had dramas, you know, being shot by documentaries. You know, it's kind of like this implicit truth or false dichotomy was being blurred, and I think. With Ghostwatch, we were trying to kind of knock a wedge into that thing between them and say, hang on, are you even aware this is happening? That, you know, that the lines between fact and fiction are being blurred. You know, do you know what you're being told? Do you know that person on the TV, just because they got a caption in front of them saying Dr. So-and-so, are they really a doctor? Do they know what they're talking about? You're believing what they're saying. You're believing what the newsreader's saying. It's kind of like fake news, you know what I mean? Which we all recognize now, but it's kind of like, I'm not saying I was a prophet or anything, but that was definitely going through my mind. Do we trust? It's all about trust, Ghostwatch, in a way, because it was, you know, do you trust what you're being told? Do you trust what you're looking at? Can you trust your eyes? And of course, in some ways, ghost stories are about that very question. Can you trust what you see? You know, so I thought, you know, those kind of ideas were kind of swirling around, really, and just we all found them really interesting as we were working on it.
The night of the premiere of Ghostwatch, the BBC added the title credit because they were worried about the reaction to.
That's right, and they what happened really, according to the producer, I wasn't involved firsthand, but she was told, unless you. They got very agitated the day before it went out that it would cause shock and panic. So somebody high up said, unless you put a writing credit at the beginning of this program, it's not going to go out. So she literally had to go back in the editing suite and put my name there at the beginning. What she did, slightly clumsily, was to insert my name amongst the people that were starring in it. So it's kind of blink and you miss it, and it's a very strange caption that she really didn't want to do. But it was that or the entire thing would be pulled, and none of us wanted that. But there were lots of things behind the scenes that a lot of kind of you know, when the raft was going round, it was kind of like whitewater rafting, you know, but a lot of it was dealt with by the producer and director rather than me, and a lot of the battles I wasn't privy to.
Well, and that's my next question is the reaction to it. I think has kind of become infamous within Britain. Within Britain, obviously. I mean, again, I think American audiences are just now kind of really finding out about it. I mean, it's on Shudder now, and it's been on Shudder for at least a year now, and that's where I initially saw it. Yeah. So, kind of tell me what your reaction was to the uproar in Britain.
Well, of course, you know, you got to put yourself back to a time when people, you could record things off the TV, but they weren't endlessly available on catch-up. So if you missed it and hadn't recorded it, you wouldn't see it again. So something like this that probably if people thought was a light entertainment program, they wouldn't have recorded it. And they might have missed the beginning. So even if they saw it as a writer's caption at the beginning, they missed it. Or they might not have looked at the TV listing that had a list of the cast in it. They might not have looked at it. So all those things. Some people came at it completely unawares. Some people... And you know, I think psychologically what's fascinating about the reaction to it is the wide range of people's reaction to it. There were people I know that said after 2 minutes I knew it was completely fake, you know, and that was that. There are people that said even when it finished, I still think even when the BBC apologised for it the next day and explained that it had been a drama, I still didn't believe them. You know, the most extraordinary reaction was a friend of mine, and I said to her a week before, because we writers, you know, don't really like to shout from the rooftops, but we like to people know. On the rare occasions we get something on the goggle box. So I said, oh, by the way, I've got this thing on next week on Saturday evening on BBC One. And she later said, oh, I believe that. And I said, what do you mean? I told you that I'd written it. And she said, yes, but when I saw Michael Parkinson, the presenter, I thought you must have got it wrong. You know, so there was something about the way it works visually that I think people's critical faculty just was bypassed by the fact that it looked like something that didn't look like a drama, you know? And some people were just totally taken unawares by that. So the following week, it hit the tabloid newspapers and the headlines went up. And for about a week, it was a big story. Then, to be perfectly honest with you, it cooled off. There were various programs on the BBC. One was called Points of View, where people basically write in to complain about things. Another one was called Bite Back, where people are in the studio audience talking to the people that made the programs. Again, kind of mostly shaking their fists at them. And my producer and executive producer appeared on that and got berated by members of the public who were angry about what had happened. And it seemed anger not really at the nature of the program so much as the BBC pulling the wool over their eyes or somehow cheating them or taking them for a mug. And it was, of course, that very thing is about how people trust a broadcaster like the BBC. And, you know, that in a way was the subject of the drama. But people didn't like that subject. They wanted to trust the public broadcaster. And that was part of the resentment, the build-up and the anger, you know. But after a while, it was very clear the BBC were going to batten down the hatches, not mention the program ever again, certainly not show it ever again. And
you won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
It kind of all died down, and then it was quiet for about 10 years, actually, and we thought, well, that's that. There's a bit of a flurry of anger, and now it's all kind of forgotten, and that's that. But the 10th anniversary in 2002, the British Film Institute wanted to release it on DVD, and me and the director and producer got a chance to record an audio track. So at last we were able to actually record what the hell we were trying to do, why we did it, what our intentions were, that it was a drama. It was a drama for a certain reason, with a certain theme, etc., etc. And then, of course, with the coming of the internet, we realized there's all these fans out there. There's all these people that were mostly kids, teenagers, horror fans, that hadn't complained, hadn't written in, hadn't said it shouldn't be allowed, or the BBC must never do something like that again, or heads must roll at the BBC, but had actually quietly really enjoyed it. Some of them thought it was fantastic. Some of them thought it was the best thing the BBC's ever done. And suddenly they want to show it at the university, you know, and they would ask me to come along and introduce the screening, and that's gone on really ever since for the last 15 years or so, really. And I've realized that it did actually all this time have quite a loyal kind of following of horror fans who are just under the radar, and thanks to the internet really kind of came out into the light, really.
So I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think you could make something like Ghostwatch in a post-social media, everyone is connected to their phones era like we live in now?
You know, I think it's, people say, would you do it again? You know, people have said to me about other projects, would you do it again? I always say, why would you do it again? It's kind of like you did it then, you know, to revisit something 25 years ago. It's kind of then, you know what I mean? Not only in the sense a movie always gets dated or anything you do gets dated, but it's peculiarly of then in terms of if you couldn't do it now because it would have absolutely no impact. And I would say it's not up to me to do the next Ghostwatch. It's up to me to see the next Ghostwatch done by somebody in a way that I would never have predicted because I'm not that person, you know? And it's funny, it's 25 years later, so it is almost a generation later when someone is going to find a way of hoaxing or doing something different, or, you know, horror's got a long tradition of doing things that shock people rigid or coming at something a different way or that kind of thing. And I'm dying to see the next thing that comes out, but it kind of won't be from me, I don't think.
Well, I mean, I think me personally, I'm not sure it could be made. It's just, I think everyone's too connected to everything, and people would be all over Twitter within the first couple minutes questioning it, right?
Well, there's the other thing, which is I don't think you can, in the public, or rather the networks in America, you're not allowed legally to show something that pretends to be news that isn't news. So if we were to do it, hypothetically, we would have to have a caption all the way through saying this is not live, this is not happening, which rather kind of takes the teeth out of the whole gag in the first place. And then, of course, if it was on some other thing like, say, Shudder, then it kind of what is the point of that? That kind of gives, you know, the place where it appears gives the game away in a sense. So I'm not sure the landscape is there to do this particular thing. But like I say, I think someone will do something. I think the trouble is that the people doing the jiggery pokery and the malefic charms and spells at the moment in terms of what we can trust and what we can't trust are probably in the political sphere rather than in the sphere of entertainment, to be honest, and that's incredibly worrying, but there's not much we can do about that.
Walk me through what your inspiration was, kind of your thoughts about hiding the character in...
First of all, the name, I wish I could give chapter and verse on this, but I can't. But I was watching a documentary about poltergeist cases, and a poor woman whose children were being haunted by something and hearing knocking in the wall said, I didn't know what to say to my kids, so I called him Mr. Radiator, or... you know, and I thought, well, I kind of like the idea of that, but I'm not going to use that. And so I used Pipes. You know, it's kind of a nickname. I love things like that, innocuous things like, you know, Norman in Norman Bates or Freddy. You know, something that doesn't sound threatening is always much more spooky. And as for the nature of him, really, I just wanted to throw everything into it. I knew we weren't going to see him much, and we weren't really going to encounter him really full on. So really I wanted him to be as dark and transgressive in every possible way. So, you know, I just went for, so he's kind of crazy, he's transgressive sexually, he's probably got bad intentions towards these kids. So everything I could think of, I wanted to churn up the idea that this malevolent character is kind of pure evil in every sense that you could possibly think, really, or just not evil. Actually, that implies that someone that cross dresses is evil. I don't mean that, but what I mean is that they're not. Everything about them is not quite the norm. You know, so they're mentally unstable. They live in a house with their family when clearly they shouldn't be, and you know, just every possible thing I could to make him feel like a kind of bogeyman, really.
So I'm also curious about like you mentioned, you didn't want them to kind of see him full on. And I think one of the more successful things that's done kind of covertly the first time you watch it, and the more times you watch it, the more times you pick up on it, is the use of the ghost being hidden in some of the shots and kind of in the background. Was that something you initially thought about when you were writing?
There were two moments that when I was writing it that I really thought, you know, if these two moments work, I will be very happy indeed. One was the idea that hang on, what we've been watching is not going live. The ghost is actually showing us old footage. You know, when they notice at the end that the picture that fell off the wall is now back on the wall. So hang on, this must be old footage. I thought that was a spooky idea, that we're actually, something's going on in the house, but we can't see it because the ghost is stopping us see it. The other thing, which I was really pleased with, was the idea that you have a camera in the someone phones in and says they've seen something in the bedroom. You show the footage to the audience at home who's watching. They see a figure in the room, but the guy on TV says, "I don't see anything. Do you?" And I thought, if I can get people at home thinking, "I did see something." He says he didn't see something, but I did see something, you know. And they say, "Oh, don't be stupid." I thought, if I can achieve that, then the whole thing will have been worthwhile, really. So, those are the two things I was aiming for. But also, I felt once in this particular thing, as it was evolving, once you were to see him full on, somehow the whole thing would fall, I think, like a stack of cards. Because I think this kind of ghost story that's trying to get under your skin, there would be nowhere to go once you kind of see him, really. And you know, it's just lessons I've got from other horror stories, for God's sake. You know, anyone that writes horror knows this. You know, Alien was most frightening before you saw the thing at the end. And, you know, The Haunting did virtually all its, you know, scares with just sound and things happening off screen, you know. You look at the classic horror films and they all tell you how to do it.
Well, I would agree. I mean, even when you look at something like Jaws, I mean, you never see the shark until the very, very end. And it's successful because of that. And me personally, I feel like horror in...
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Have you ever wanted to dive deeper into the horror movies you love? Beyond the Blood is a horror podcast for fans who want more than just surface-level screams. We do deep dives into the movies that shaped us, digging into director commentaries, behind-the-scenes stories, deleted scenes, and the special features that most people skip. Each episode is a love letter to the genre. We break down how these films were made, the creative risks that paid off or didn't, and the lasting impact they've had on the genre as a whole. From 70s slashers to modern nightmares, we celebrate the craft, chaos, and characters that keep us coming back. If you're the kind of fan who rewatches movies with the commentary on, or you simply grew up in the video store horror aisle, the Beyond the Blood podcast was made for you. New episodes every single week. Subscribe, and let's dig deep. Welcome to the Beyond the Blood podcast.
The 21st century has lost some of that subtlety. A lot of that subtlety.
Kind of too easy in a way to press a button and put a bit of magic that will visual magic in that enhancing a scene, say, that will make it unreal. But somehow that unreality that goes into making a special effects moment, to me, is exactly what takes me out of the film being scary, because I'm thinking, oh, that was clever, or that was nicely lit, or that was a good bit of prosthetics. And all those things distract me from getting involved with the characters and the moment. Not that I can't enjoy those films for what they are, but you know, a lot of the time, less is more. You know, I'm more inclined towards that scene in The Sixth Sense where the woman walks out of the kitchen, and when she comes back in the kitchen, and it's still the same shot, but she walks back into the kitchen, and all the cups that are hanging up are broken, and it's all done in one shot. And it's really spooky. That's all that happens, you know. And it's just a bit of clever camera work and something that you don't expect. And it just gives me a shiver just to think about that, you know. Whereas, you know, a scene from, say, The Woman in Black with a woman that looks like a witch flying through the air, you know, with all this makeup on, that doesn't make me feel scared at all. It's a good story, but it doesn't make me feel scared. There's all sorts of different. I think actually horror as kind of in this century has it's kind of a path that's forked in a way, or forked into maybe 2 or 3 different genres. I think there's the almost kind of big budget special effects horror ghost train. Be it at one end of the scale, kind of Van Helsing or something like that, which is kind of almost action horror, or The Mummy is another example, which I think they kind of almost leave horror behind and become kind of action fantasy, really. And then if you go in the other direction, I think there's really interesting things being done in the indie world. The films like It Follows and The Babadook and The Witch, movies on a kind of smaller scale that can be a bit more edgy and experimental in their effects. I think it's healthy. It's really healthy at the moment, really.
Kind of what were your thoughts on it? What's your personal kind of proudest moment from script to screen of Ghostwatch?
It was a little bit of a shock, I admit, because some of the scenes were completely reordered. So they didn't really happen in the order that I put them in the script. So that always happens in shooting, and it always it makes your head spin slightly. And whether it's Ghostwatch or it's anything else that I've done, it always takes a few watches and a few months, if not years, to actually settle into accepting what the finished product is rather than what was in your head, because inevitably what's in the writer's head is completely different than what is even feasible. It's never the same, even if I were to direct it with an unlimited budget, etc., things do not turn out the same as you want it in your head, and sometimes that's for better, because an awful lot of clever people work on it and improve it. But I think those 2 moments are what I enjoyed best. Those kind of those moments where you feel inherently that the audience at home might be thinking, "Well, I did see something," or it's funny when I watch it now with an audience, usually of quite smug students, and they all kind of know about it, or usually 50% have seen it before, which is interesting. They always begin laughing at it for about 10 minutes. They're all TV presenters they've seen, and it's a bit hokey. It's like a kind of crappy, low-rent, light entertainment show that they normally wouldn't watch. And they come at it quite with a superior kind of intellect, really. And then about halfway through, it's quite extraordinary. They start to get a bit quieter and start to laugh a lot less, and get slightly disturbed by it. And by the end, you feel that they've really got very disturbed by it sometimes, or and I was going to say enjoyed it rather than be dismissive of it, which is what they expected to be. So that's very instructive to watch it with a live audience, even though it was never intended to be shown on the big screen. It's always fun to watch it on the big screen.
So, speaking about, going around, because you mentioned that you go around to college campuses and you've been invited to screen it. In your personal opinion, how do you think it's aged in
well, I think in terms of if you look at anything else from that era, 1992, anything would be horrendously aged in terms of TV tastes now, just in terms of everything from the way it's shot to the the quality of the image, to the graphics, to the haircuts, to the way people act or behave on screen is it's a generation different, as I said earlier. So it's not surprising that it's dated in some ways, but I never have a problem with things being dated in that sense. I mean, some of my favorite films are horror films from the 60s, and I can still watch them. I would watch them right now, rather than some of the films that are released at the moment. I would still get a big kick from them because I can put aside the fact that it's going to be dated. And I would hope that a reasonable viewer would be able to see that it was a novel, an original idea at the time, even if they can't forgive some of the the style choices that were open to us at the time. I hope they can see that it was, some filmmakers trying to do something different more than anything.
Well, and I think for myself personally, the fact that it looks kind of it's from the 90s, I think works in its favor. I don't know. It's just, there's something about, and I mean, this is really kind of insane to say, but period horror pieces, because even though it is from the 90s, it is period horror. There's something about period horror that just seems to elevate it in a way. Yeah. But I mean, again, like when I saw that it was on Shudder, I'd kind of heard about it again. I mean, American audiences, like you've mentioned, that just, it never made it over here.
No, of course not. Well, they didn't allow it to be shown elsewhere. Right. The BBC literally did not want it shown.
Which is kind of insane.
There was a rumor that, I know that Oren Peli, who did Paranormal Activity, had seen it because he was asked in an interview to recommend half a dozen films that he thought should be known more widely, and he mentioned Ghostwatch as being one of them, which was a great thrill to see that he'd mentioned that. Whether the guys who did Blair Witch had seen it, I still haven't got to the bottom of whether they had or not. I think someone once asked them and they'd never heard of it, but so I take that at face value. But I'd kind of like to know. I think the Blair Witch found footage subgenre, people say, do you feel responsible for that? Do you feel that Ghostwatch kicked off that thing? And I don't really, because I think that was simply kicked off by the technology becoming so available to people, small camcorders that they could carry around and that kind of thing. I think it was the availability of the technology altered the kind of stories they could tell with the technology, So that's what I think opened the door to the found footage horror.
Well, and would you consider Ghostwatch to be found footage?
No, because the term didn't exist when it was done, so I don't see how it could be, really. It was... I don't even like calling it a hoax, actually, to be honest with you. We never ever used that word when we were...
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Devising it was a drama. It was a drama that was going to be done in a certain way. The prime purpose wasn't to be a hoax, like an April Fool. The BBC wouldn't give us, whatever it did give us, £700,000 or whatever it was for, probably a lot more than that, but not much more than that, actually, to do a 90-minute drama. They don't do that for a kind of prank. They had to justify it to themselves and to their superiors as a piece of drama that was worth making, So it wasn't, people say it was a kind of hoax, a joke, and that kind of thing. I mean, it was a joke in that it had kind of satirical intent, as well as the intent to scare you, like a ghost story should. But it wasn't, the prime directive wasn't to be a hoax.
Well, I wouldn't call it a hoax, but I guess I could see why someone would make that statement. I mean, then you could say that any form of entertainment is a hoax because it's not. I mean, you watch a Marvel movie, you're not expecting that to be real. I mean, that's not any more real than anything else.
No, but I think in the case of Ghostwatch, it was pretending to be a live show that was really happening. That was the style we were doing it in, and that's what people objected to more than anything.
Obviously, it's had an effect on your career. Kind of tell me a little bit about how Ghostwatch has affected your career and kind of your notoriety in the industry and in what you do for a living.
My notoriety in the industry, that sounds like I'm a terrible person, but
no, not like that.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I know you're not trying to imply that, but you never know. I might be notorious in the industry for all you know. Well, I think, for good or ill, I think it kind of branded me as that ghost story writer. And to be honest, I've lived with that quite happily as someone that's interested in the paranormal and ghost stories all my life. And I don't, there's no other genre that I like writing as much, probably. But I do tire of the half dozen times people say, can we do another one of those? Meaning, something that pretends to be live. And I really don't want to do that. Although, I like I say, I've plowed the furrow of ghost stories, supernatural stories, quite happily since then, and written books and drama series that probably have Ghostwatch as a kind of start point of that career in a way.
After reading everything I've ever read about it, it sounds like everyone just went completely apeshit. And and the same thing happened in the United States with the Orson Welles War of the Worlds broadcast. I mean, people were grabbing their guns to go and hunt down the aliens that were landing. I mean, this is the closest kind of analog.
It wasn't quite as bad as people taking to the streets and getting in their cars and leaving their homes. It wasn't quite like that. But we did get, for instance, a priest rang the BBC and said, even though the BBC said it wasn't true, he thought the BBC had inadvertently raised demonic forces. There were 3 women who were pregnant at the time they watched Ghostwatch, and all 3 of them, presumably at different locations, went into labor that night, which means that their kids probably are 26 years old now, which I find a bit frightening. Maybe that's a sequel, I don't know. But my favorite one was a letter that came to the producer from a woman whose husband was a veteran of the Falklands conflict, the recent war that we'd had with Argentina, and he was so scared by the program that he literally pooed his pants, and she wanted compensation from the BBC to buy him a new pair of jeans, which has got to be a high point if you're a horror writer to actually cause someone to literally dirty their pants.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I just can't imagine someone shitting themselves because of how scary it is. That's amazing. Well, I mean, again, I'm watching it as an adult and knowing that it's a piece of fiction. I mean, I've the first time I watched it, I tried to put myself in the mind frame of someone watching it in.
The funny thing, thinking back on it, is that it was usually or almost exclusively adults that got angry about it. Children or kids around 12 or 13, I think, I've got a theory about this. I think children are vulnerable figures in our society. They're used to being victims. So they have a kind of very malleable sense of what's real and what's imaginary. And I think they are quite capable of thinking around whether something's true or false. And it's adults that become entrenched in being told what's true, being told what's false. And if they get their foundation of belief shaken, they don't like it. But children are kind of volatile about belief because they are down the pecking order, so to speak, really. So I think that's why children we tended to get reactions from kids that maybe went to school the next week and they did a whole project about Ghostwatch. They drew pictures about it. They talked about it. We got sent pictures that the kids drew of the ghost and this kind of thing. Not couched in a negative way at all, really. So that I found was curious, is that there was adults that had their security kind of threatened, but not children.
Well, I would assume also part of it is because we as adults feel like we have a pretty good sense of, like you said, what is real and false.
Well, I think maybe kids also see the fun side of the anarchic side of doing something that pretends to be not what it is. And maybe they kind of got the gag earlier and they found it a bit more exciting rather than upsetting for that reason, It is possible for people to find it upsetting and exciting. This is the extraordinary thing. I mean, people have come up to me and said, when I saw that when I was 12 years old, I didn't sleep for a week. I left the light on. My sister had to sleep in the same room. But you know what? It made me want to make horror films, and I'm still making horror films today. Or, and you think, wow, that's, I always kind of answer by saying, I don't know whether to say sorry or thank you very much. Both, yeah.
Why not both? Yeah. Well, I mean, I know for me personally, I remember the first horror movie I ever watched was Poltergeist. And, I mean, it scared me senseless. And I didn't watch horror movies for the longest time. And then I kind of, when I turned 16, I really got into it. So, I mean, you know, but I remember thinking to myself now, like, you know, when you're scared, there's something exciting, like you said, about being scared. And kind of it pushes certain buttons.
Well, my general philosophy about horror is that it's a force for good in society rather than bad. I think it's only people that are not horror fans that think it's somehow shouldn't be allowed. But I think it's never done me any harm. Put it like that. Apart from being notorious.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah. Jesus Christ. The notorious, yeah. I mean, again,
I do.
You know, that kind of, you know, that's stuck with Orson Welles
young
forever.
Producer
so
who, trying to pitch ideas to them, and the first thing they want to talk about is Ghostwatch because they saw it when they were like 6 years old or 8 years old. And obviously the first reaction I have is, "Oh my God, I'm so old," and they're so young. But it is quite flattering that at least they wanted to talk about it. I mean. You know, Kim Newman, who's a film critic over here, kind of expert on horror, really. Wow. He says, how many other TV shows do you remember from October 1992? You know, not many 25 years later. So at least we must have been doing something right.
Have a hunger for horror? A yen for Yelp yarns? Then give your blood...
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Cuddle bones of boon and tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. Join sordid slime slingers Casualty Chris and Father Malone as they take on HBO's groundbreaking television series Tales from the Crypt. Here's what the rotting and rancid rabble are saying about Chronicles from the Crypt. Tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. You have nothing to lose except your life.
Who is Carl Kolchak?
He's a reporter.
Now that is news, Vincenzo. News! And we are a news paper. We are supposed to print news, not suppress it.
With the INS.
What's an INS?
Independent News Service. They're founded in 1904 by Enrico Paluzzi.
Who seems to have a nose for the strange and unusual.
Well, last year in Las Vegas, I uncovered a series of murders that turned out to have been committed by a vampire.
And what is the Kolchak Tapes?
It's a podcast.
All about Carl Kolchak.
What's a Kolchak?
The Night Stalker.
And where can you get it?
On iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.kolchaktapes.com.
As foolish a game as any that Gory the Ghoul could make up.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
Week after week, I'm mesmerized by the focus given great films and questionable films alike. But every episode is a learning and entertaining experience.
This is hands down the best movie podcast. They cover so many different genres across so many years, from obscure movies to blockbusters.
If there's only one podcast about movies and cinema that you listen to, make it this one.
The Projection Booth Podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
In 1985, a curious phenomenon occurred. The Twilight Zone returned to television, featuring all new tales of mystery and imagination from the minds of Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, George R.R. Martin, and Stephen King. Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 85 podcast looks back at that land of shadow and substance and re-examines the groundbreaking successor to Rod Serling's legacy. Featuring new interviews with the show's creators and cast, Dreams for Sale can be found on iTunes and at twilightzone85.com. Dreams for Sale. We'll be waiting for you in the Twilight Zone.
So how did you initially get involved with Ghostwatch?
Well, I was working with Ruth Baumgarten on a film called My Sister Wife, and we were doing post on that. And she, as the producer, she said, would I read this script? And just wouldn't let me go. Yeah.
So what did you think of the initial script?
There was always, I loved it, but it was more when we first started, there were a lot of sort of strands to it. And I think probably Stephen might have told you the same thing. And we had to clean it up and make it more of one story for the exec producers. So I went on that journey with him. But the first thing that really sold me on the script was the moment when Michael Parkinson said he couldn't see anything in the shadows, and there was something in the shadows as scripted and as we did it. So I just had this immediate ambition that there would be people half watching Halloween night, in and out, and then sort of yelling from the settee, I can see something, and Michael Parkinson can't. And I just thought that was just intriguing.
So it was the reality nature of it, then kind of the misdirection that really drew you in initially.
Yeah.
So, you read the script, kind of, walk me through the process of what happened next, kind of getting on the set and starting to work with Michael Parkinson and Sarah and Mike and Craig.
So do you know any of these characters over in America? Obviously not, I imagine.
I know who they are kind of reading after the fact. And there are analogs in the States, obviously, to kind of who they were in the 90s.
Okay. So, we streamlined the script a bit towards the one location, one story of the two girls, and then of course the casting process. We were very keen to have, I suppose, personalities, people that you would recognise from the television. Michael Parkinson hadn't been on the television at that time for a couple of years, but he was absolutely iconic for that natural interview style that he had. He was very famous for interviewing Muhammad Ali, and so he had this wonderfully natural style. So we were really pleased to get him. And Sarah Green had just come off children's television, and then by the casting director, because the complicated thing was that we were from film department, but we were stepping into which was really a faux TV thing. So it was quite complex, that crossing over all the time. It wasn't like we just went out there for one night with TV cameras. We came from the film department, and they were quite upset when I said, look, I'm really going to shoot this with TV cameras. They wanted it all to be on film. There was all that artifice of film. They wanted it on film because it was film. And they were quite shocked that I actually wanted to get it be very pure with the TV language. Sarah Green, and then the casting director suggested that Mike Smith, who was another TV personality, who was her husband in reality, was involved. So there was that crossover, and then Stephen really embraced that, and we made that part of the script at the end, that he was worried about her when she was stuck in the cupboard, So that was that evolved through the casting. That little part of the story.
So you mentioned, that these folks were all, like you said, these are them portraying themselves, obviously. How important was it when you were working on casting that you cast identifiable people from kind of the news and kind of the news world in Britain and in the UK?
Well, it was just part of the fun if we could get them to do it. It was just part of the fun. I suppose if everybody had said no to us, we would have gone through to casting actors. The actors that were there were Gillian Bevan, who played the parapsychologist, Breege Brennan, who played the mother, obviously the children. So there was quite a few actors. But if everyone had turned us down, we would have carried on. But it was fun. It was just a fun element of it.
Well, and I mean, knowing what the response ended up being in the public, I think it helped kind of drum up the fervor and help sell it, obviously, which is one of the best things about it, is how straight-faced it is, and kind of reality forward Ghostwatch ends up being, even all the way through to the end.
Yeah. We actually had no idea. Well, I personally had absolutely no idea that the public was going to react the way they did.
That's same thing Stephen said. Yeah. So, talk to me a little bit about working on the set with them, what that was like on a day-to-day basis.
Sarah Green had started in drama school, so she was very keen. So although she was a TV presenter, she was very happy to go back to what she saw as her roots. So that was great. Bree Brennan, the actor who played the mother, she was a consummate professional actor. So Michael Parkinson was really interesting because analysing the style of performance from Michael Parkinson, there's either the autocue, which has its own sing-song rhythm. When they're reading autocue, it has a slight projection, and it also has a slight artifice. And then
you won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
When he's off script and talking to his, this is him as he works. Do you see what I mean? So when he's talking to his interviewee, he has this wonderful conversational, relaxed style, which makes him feel really special. So that's, when we gave him the script, it was beginning to sound like autocue because because that's his training. So during the rehearsal period, we broke that open. So we just said, look, don't worry about the script. You know the points. We would rehearse the sequences in the studio, and we'd sort of just remind him. I'd remind him of the points that he had to make and where he had to get to, and then to treat Gillian Bevan, who was his interviewee, to in exactly the same way as he's always, with that wonderful relaxed manner. But of course, that put Gillian, who was a trained actress, waiting for her cue lines in a completely awkward spot because she actually had to really stay on her toes. And because she was off the page, verbatim Stephen's script, and Michael Parkinson was somewhere around it. So it was really interesting. But we were just always forever trying to get to that real reality and break away from what was happening at the time. Was that even every performance had a slight artifice, whereas it's not so much now, but then there was an artifice that I was trying to get rid of all the time.
Well, I think it personally comes through, the way, in a way that, again, it feels natural. And if that's clearly what you were going for, it, I can imagine the dichotomy between the two, one off script and one just kind of doing what he does normally, can be a little bit of a kind of an interesting situation to work through.
Yeah. We used to rehearse these massive long takes, and, which was mimicking the live TV language, but instead of live TV where they package stuff and go between cameras, we had all the cameras running and we took it back to the editing room. So yeah, so we used to rehearse these really long takes, sort of up to midday, and then we'd go into these long takes. As soon as we got them, we'd just break and then do the same thing the next day. Of course, everything on the wall in the background in the wall of TVs was all pre-recorded 2 weeks before in the house. So we had like a 5-week shoot.
Obviously, you've talked a little bit about working with Michael Parkinson and Gillian Bevan in the studio. Tell me a little bit about working on the set at the house with Sarah Green and the child actors and everyone else.
Okay, so it's a real council house. It was just empty that we, obviously, found as a location. And I was quite keen that it was a very accessible location that people could identify without it being too special or spooky or anything. So it was a real council house. And stylistically, I was quite pure with it. So we had cameras in the room, wide-angle cigarette cameras, they were called, strapped into the corners of the room. And then we had the roving camera from our cameraman. And because I was quite keen to blur the edges between fact and fiction or drama and reality all the time, we advertised at the BBC for a volunteer camera and sound guy to actually be on screen, to be part of the performance, as it were. And we got 2 people coming forward, and they're the guys that did it. So we had one cameraman come forward and one sound guy come forward. So they were, so we didn't have to mess about with actors trying to look like they were using the camera. So do you see what I mean? So
it was cameramen looking like actors.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So
obviously, at the time, and I personally still think it's a very groundbreaking piece of media, Ghostwatch is. In found footage films, and obviously this is found footage mixed with kind of faux documentary, the camera being on constantly is kind of always it's a conceit that the audience has to kind of either accept or not accept, and I think in Ghostwatch it works because of the way that it's staged. Tell me a little bit about, working inside the house itself and kind of being able to really get the shots. Some of the shots early on are it's kind of innocuous where you have Keith Ferrari as Pipes kind of just showing up in shots. Talk to me a little bit about how important it was for you to get those kind of shots with him in the background, just kind of as innocuous as possible.
I suppose it was a bit of a knife edge, because you don't want to, the game's up if you're too obvious with him. But at the same time, it was fun to see him. So it was a bit of a knife edge, all that. But I do remember going down to makeup when because the storyline is that his face is scratched with cats, and the makeup artist did this fantastic job with eye missing, fantastic, really gory, and I went down and said, it's great, and it's what it is, what the story is about, but I'm not going to show it much at all. I mean, they took that, because I think once I'd crossed that line into gore, then you lose. I'd lost. I felt I was going to lose. I wanted to make the piece for the uninitiated, not cross the line for the blood and guts, gore, horror. Do you see what I mean? So I kept it I kept him quite obscure, but at the same time I liked him in there. Does that answer your question?
Count online the list is that there are 9 times in Ghostwatch that you can see the ghost, aka Pipes. Is that the total number? Are there more? Were there more that were kicked around that never made it in?
There were definitely a couple that producer insisted I take out. I seem to remember that we did slightly get in, me and the editor slightly got into it, and we were putting them anywhere. And I thought we were working on the number of 13, but I know at least one was taken out. So do you know what? I don't know. I don't know what the number is.
Well, because I've seen 13, but everything I've read has 9.
Oh, you've seen 13. Great.
Well, I haven't seen the 13, but I've seen that number kicked around. But the kind of the lists that I've seen say 9.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
What were some of the ones that got taken out?
There was some. I think there's one that still exists, but in the whip pans we could sneak something in. Things that were easier. I mean, a lot were staged in. When the tape's going and he's actually in there, and we just tickle some light on him so you sort of see him, and then reflection in the glass in the house. We had him so that you could just see him. He appears behind Breege Brennan when she's talking about the terrible things that are happening in the house. We just tickle him in, but then it was sort of quite easy, I suppose, to sneak the odd sort of flash frame when the lights were going in the studio when the chaos was happening. So, yeah, just to stick the odd couple of frames in.
Is there one of those kind of sightings in the film that sticks out to you as kind of more successful, or the one that you kind of are proud of the most?
I suppose it's the whip pan back from the cameraman when he's spooked in the curtains. So when they're all being shunted out of the room, yeah.
Yeah, I really like the one in the studio. I think the one in the studio, kind of the third one in the film, I think that one always anytime I've talked to anyone about it, or I've told someone to watch it, they're like, that first one is just where it kind of fades in and then fades back out, and then you realize there's no one.
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times, or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months, or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Hello, filthy movie lovers. My name is Gentry Austin.
And I'm Casey Scott.
And we're the hosts of the Sin Syndicate, film podcast for something weirdos, anti-criterion bros, and Joseph Sarno aficionados. Join us semi-weekly as we peer into the adults-only theaters and sticky-floored cinemas of the golden age of sexploitation, when the morals were loose, the laws were murky, and the intercourse was all simulated. Find us now on the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Behind Gillian Bevan, I think, is just so successful, and really, like you said, the whole thing with Michael Parkinson, kind of the audience questioning whether or not he saw anything when they saw something, that's kind of reminiscent of that. It's like, did I see something? Because no one else seems to, say anything about it.
Well, that was the moment in the writing that I was completely hooked. So I'm really pleased if that comes over in the finished thing.
Well, I think it's also the one moment early on that you kind of really get the sense that there's something more going on.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's the hook. It's that is the kind of the hooking point. So, let's talk a little bit about you doing the voice for Pipes. Because apparently you couldn't get what you wanted out of the other people that you had the performance with.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's the same in America, but so we booked a voiceover artist to do the Ghost's voice because obviously Pipes himself was a supporting artist, and so we'd finished the piece, and we were in the sound booths and doing final mixes and preparing for the final mix. And the voiceover artist came in, and he was like incredibly skilled at every accent in the UK. But when I asked, doing a ghost is something completely different. So when he left, I just said, look, it's to the guys. I said, it's absolutely not what I want. And we were talking about it, and I said, they said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, it's something like this. And they just said, look, let's do it. So as I was describing what I wanted, they just, taped it. So I became the voice of the ghost.
Well, that's how you get exactly what you want, right? Do it yourself. So that's what I've been told, at least. If you want something done right, do it yourself.
I suppose the interesting thing is that it needed performance, in the sense that which voiceover, like a voiceover artist doesn't feel like it felt like it needed someone who was desperate. That's how, the voice needed to feel desperate. And that was the missing element.
So it had to be coming from a specific kind of place.
Yeah, it had to be from an emotive place, I think. I don't know how far I got there, but it had to be a different place from just technical.
So let's talk a little bit about the end of Ghostwatch, because towards the end, Ghostwatch essentially comes completely off the rails. You have Sarah Green getting trapped in the cupboard. You have Michael Parkinson getting possessed seemingly by the ghost. Talk to me a little bit about ratcheting up the tension towards the end of Ghostwatch.
Well, I suppose it starts to go when the lights go and the cameraman falls down the stairs, and then they have to put on the infrared, I suppose. And when she gets stuck into the cupboard, which was quite a palaver because it was a council house, so we had masses of things happening in a tiny cupboard,
right?
Wind, smoke, and trying to get Sarah Green in there. I mean, I do remember when we were destroying the studio, as it were. The lighting cameraman, we were discussing what it would look like, and we just talked our way through it, and then we left the house lights on and didn't do any lighting. And you got this fantastic, murky, end of the world feel in the studio that was really, which we all do. That's it. That we were so pleased with that. And then also the cameras, they've got this wonderful hydraulic feel that these cameras have. So you can just push them and they glide across the floor because because they're made, because they're so heavy, they're made with that ease. And we just pushed the camera around and then shot what we were, what was on the camera. And the natural and the hydraulics on the camera, when they're unmanned, they have that wonderful slow droop as the camera heads fall down. And so I let Michael Parkinson wander around the studio anywhere he wanted to, and with these cameras in any position they wanted to see what I got, just to try and get that end of the world feel.
It always just cracks me up how kind of nonchalant his reaction is at the end, where he's just kind of walking around as the studio is being torn apart by the wind and kind of the ghost, and it always strikes me as so odd. I think probably as an American, because if it were in the United States and that were going on, I mean, you'd have people going completely ballistic in the studio.
Yeah. So. Yeah, maybe, but I suppose I wanted him to have a slight to be curious and unnerved, whereas everyone else going mad. That's what I was hoping to achieve.
Gotcha. And I think it completely works in a way that again is completely believable and sells the just the lie, I guess, in a way. So you wrap up shooting, you're in the editing booth. You've already talked a little bit about certain kind of things on the cutting room floor, like some of the apparition sightings not making it into the final cut. Was there anything else any kind of other parts of Ghostwatch that ended up not making it into the final televised cut? There was probably, I mean, I think, we had to, in any piece you lose stuff. We lost a bit at the end. And we definitely tightened. I can't remember losing whole scenes, but I do remember that we had to tighten up a lot. We showed it to, Ruth and I showed it to a trusted friend of hers, a French critic. She had a critic background, and he said that he thought it was intellectually very stimulating, but not at all scary. And I was so disappointed. And so I went back into the cutting room and really, really tried to talk it up with the edit. So we were quite. I like to think that I'm quite hard on it in the sense to indulge ourselves. Well, I mean, again, the first time I watched it, I was definitely there are some moments of dread and tension. So, I mean, obviously the editing, the going back in and editing it worked. So, the way it was received in the UK is comparable to the way Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast was received in the States in some respects.
Yeah.
Obviously, no one was going to grab guns to run down to the house and start shooting at the ghosts. But kind of for you, what was it like kind of hearing the reaction and the responses to Ghostwatch after it aired and during it airing?
Well, so the night that it went out, Ruth, the producer, had much more of a sense actually than certainly I had of what might happen. She had us all going to a party and kept us off the street. So we all went to this party to watch it going out that night. She didn't want anyone to see us because she wanted it to feel like it was live. Obviously, we'd finished it, 2 months before. And then she actually went to Television Centre, BBC, to man the phones because we'd put up a phone number, as you probably remember. And so we had a proper team of parapsychologists, and we took it very seriously that people would take the phone number very seriously. So there was the normal banks of people who would answer phones and our own that we supplied to answer this phone number. And of course, they were just jammed. I mean, the phone lines were completely jammed, especially that 5 minutes where the ghost appears and doesn't, the part we're talking about. People couldn't get through at all. There's some, ludicrous figures about, I don't know, thousands of people trying to get through, to police stations all up and down the country as well. So everyone was worried about where Sarah Green had gone. And then the other thing is that we have this thing called presentation, which talks about the program after it.
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times, or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months, or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Gone out, and there was nobody knew quite what to do in presentation. I've been told since that there was quite a new person on presentation, had no idea what to do. So when the program finished, the live presenter in between just said, and now to the football, which actually made it worse. Or the snooker or something. So it made it worse. Nobody said, "Oh, that was great drama from whatever." They just pretended nothing had happened. So it made it even worse. So all that was going on during the night. Also, the TV technicians were watching it on the screens in the middle of in the foyer in the BBC where they show all the channels, and they were going, "Oh my God, what's happening in Studio 2?" Which, of course, there was nothing happening in Studio 2. So that all went on the night, and then the next week was just tabloid mayhem, where they were very angry. But everybody was very angry. The press were very angry at every stage, really. They were angry that Auntie had broken faith with the nation. BBC had told a lie.
So for you personally, kind of what are your thoughts on the way it was received? I mean, talking about people losing faith and being upset and the phone lines being jammed, obviously that didn't help, but what's kind of your personal reaction to everything that went on surrounding it?
Slight confusion. I mean, Steve and I sort of were marvelled at the fact that nobody saw it as a drama. Initially nobody looked at it as drama at all, because it was a genuine comment about, can you believe everything you see on television? And we thought that maybe we'd get away with entertaining people and maybe they'd be confused for the first 10 minutes or something. But we didn't realise that, a lot of people were confused right to the end or bought it. I mean, there's such varying reactions. And also there was a tendency, I think, because apparently I didn't go to it, but there was a program called Bite Back where the public are allowed to talk about programs that are made. And Ruth went, and she said that, half of the time they were saying they thought it was great, and half of it they were complaining about it. Of course, the only bit that was aired was the complaints. So I don't know. I don't know. For ages, people used to come up to us and confess that they liked Ghostwatch, but nobody would ever say it out loud. It was almost like you weren't allowed to say it.
Well, and the way that the BBC treated it for a decade, almost, was it 2 decades? That didn't help either.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, essentially making sure it never saw the light of day for, almost, 2 decades after it came out.
Yeah.
I guess it was, what is it? It was 12 years?
So after the 10th, on its 10th anniversary, the BFI published DVDs, TV classics, and someone tipped them off that Ghostwatch was to be watched. They didn't know what it was. I phoned them up. Someone tipped me off that the BFI, the British Film Institute, were going to publish the DVD. So I phoned them up and said, "Do you want Stephen and I to come in and do like a director and writer and thing?" And they said, "Oh yeah, if you want to." So that so it was still fairly obscure and buried. I mean, it had an unofficial website and a strong following, but all underground. So yeah, so the DVD was published 10 years, and that had a 5-year run or something like a 2-year run, and then they stopped, and then there was a blank period again, and then I think 101 sort of took it up, but the BBC had never shown it again.
So that was something that Stephen spoke with me about, and I'm kind of curious if this has happened to you as well. A lot of people my age who saw it when they were kids, really had a positive reaction to it.
Yeah.
Versus adults.
Yeah.
Have you kind of noticed the same thing?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting because I had a 1-year-old child when I directed this, and I had a nanny for the 1-year-old child, and it sounds like a Shaggy Dog story. Her mother was a teacher for 8-year-olds, and they were completely obsessed with it. And they were in Sheffield in a state school, and I started this massive long correspondence with these 8-year-old children, and their letters are hilarious. And they just take it. I don't know. They take it more like their make-believe is so much more sophisticated than adults. I think adults felt wronged on behalf of everybody else, whereas the kids really had fun with it. Well, they certainly did with these letters, and I wrote back and sort of told them how it was all done and all the rest of it. But yeah, so I've got about 40 letters from 8-year-olds who seem to really enjoy it.
Yeah, that's what Stephen talked with me about, was kind of adults feeling like the trust had been broken and they couldn't trust the BBC, which, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think, do you know what I think it's, from my point of view in retrospect, I really think it's to do with the language that I used. So because I kept it quite clean and in the sense, clean to TV language. I mean, I did break my own rules a couple of times because technically it couldn't have been done what I was trying to do if I'd been totally purist. But I do think that people read subconsciously, especially then. I think audiences are more sophisticated now, but then they would read the camera language and see it as truth in the same way that we used to see, handheld running around as documentary. Obviously, we don't now, but do you see what I mean? So I think that's the arena we were in.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the legacy of Ghostwatch. Kind of for you personally, what has the legacy of Ghostwatch been for you?
Yeah, I think it has had quite a big influence. I mean, obviously, it's nice to think that it's had a big influence. But, Blair Witch came out after it. Paranormal Activity always sort of gives a nod to us. He talks about Ghostwatch as inspiration. I think we were, I suppose, in reality, I think we were at the beginning of something, that's for sure. Whether we were instrumental, I don't know, but I think, we were definitely at the beginning of something, because language was changing. It was, Stephen and I watched quite a bit of reality TV or factual TV to get on top of the language before we went into production. And it was very interesting what was happening, in the war footage that was coming back in 91 had music on it, which for me was almost immoral. There was a program that we had on air called 999, which was totally dramatized, which was factual stories but totally dramatized, maybe sometimes without actors, but lots of POV, lots of blood, lots of fakery. So the crossover was happening all over the place, and I just think we were right at the beginning of the dramatic crossover.
And for your career, how has Ghostwatch affected your personal career?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Stephen and I are trying to we've nearly got there, but we're looking for the last bit of money for our next for the next piece that we want the next feature that we want to make. I don't know. Steve and I there was for at least for a few years, we were slightly buried. That's for sure. By the BBC anyway.
You mean like black?
Yeah, definitely. Well, maybe you can't say definitely, but yeah, people were a bit nervous.
You think that's because of the reaction of the public or the reaction of the public to the BBC?
I think it's the reaction of the public, and they didn't know how to handle it.
So that's what always strikes me as odd about Ghostwatch in the way that the BBC had. It's always strange to me that the BBC...
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
BBC didn't think that the reaction was going to be what it was. It's always just kind of strange to me that they didn't think that people were going to kind of lose it over it, especially with the phone number at the bottom and trying to present it as reality.
Well, it's interesting because Richard Brooke, who was a fantastic executive producer, he and Ruth, I think they knew the potential of it, and the BBC was a huge organisation and quite cumbersome because of it. And they have these. Richard Brooke explained to me this is part of the BBC I know nothing about as a director, but he explained that they had meetings every week, and if there was a controversial programme or controversial anything, you could raise it and discuss it. And he described, before he passed away, he described to us about how he tried to bring up, I've got Ghostwatch, this thing, and they just go, yeah, Richard, yeah, we all know your programs are great. And so there was he said that nobody wants to know, nobody wanted to know. So even though he tried to bring it up, nobody wanted to hear what he was talking about. I don't think anybody actually... I just don't think they knew, and they knew how it was going to go. And he sent me some correspondence, which I thought was really interesting, where he'd shown it to someone and they just thought that I'd got it completely wrong, that there was no drama in it. They absolutely didn't understand the reality element. They just thought I'd basically messed up. Because the actors didn't seem like they were acting, all this sort of stuff. They didn't get the style of it at all. So I think I just think they were wrong-footed. But also I don't, it's a huge organisation. I don't think anyone sort of took responsibility, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, it's easier to blame the filmmakers and the screenwriter, I guess. It's kind of the way I've always looked at it.
Yeah, always blame the one out of the room.
Yeah. For sure. That's the easiest one because the one out of the room can't defend themselves. Yeah. Are you a fan of the horror genre? And if you are a fan of the horror genre, what are your thoughts on kind of the found footage genre that seems to have, some inspiration from Ghostwatch, at least admittedly and not admittedly in some respects?
I think I'm a fan of the horror genre I don't particularly like blood and too much guts and gore. I don't go that way, but I do love the thrill and the psychological tension, and I love that side of stuff. I actually really enjoyed Paranormal Activity, especially one. Yeah. I mean, I remember Jaws was had a big impression on me as a young watcher. So I do like to come out. I do like that sort of suspension of I like to be thrilled. I like that cathartic ride. I like it. Yeah.
All right, so we are back and we are finishing up talking about Ghostwatch. So, Mike, I am curious, since, we've kind of talked horror movies in the past, I'm kind of curious your thoughts just in general on the found footage horror subgenre, because I think a lot of people really have like a preconceived notion of it, and that's kind of the point of this month, is to maybe change some preconceived notions about the quality of found footage horror.
Well, I think that filmmakers who play with the conventions, who know how to make things look like they were real and then go from there, those are the ones who do it the most successfully. Too often, if I'm watching found footage stuff, and I hate the term found footage because it has changed over the years. Found footage used to literally be stuff that you would find in a dumpster and then reuse it, like stuff like Bruce Conner, filmmakers from the 50s and 60s or even earlier would repurpose footage, and that was truly found footage. So this faux reality, and I know it's a losing battle for me to call it anything other than found footage, but this new found footage style, new as of 30 years ago now we're going on with this stuff, and you can...
Well, more than that, because technically, I don't know, Eric, where do you start found footage at? I start found footage films in general at Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah, that's about where I would start. I mean, what we would consider, when somebody says found footage now, chances are you're talking about a found footage horror movie, and that's like the first one. So, yeah, that's where I would start it. And then, like we've been talking about, like, this is, I mean, it's sort of weird to put Ghostwatch in the found footage category because it, like, kind of is and kind of isn't. It's like faux documentary. It's like faux something totally different. There was like a fake live broadcast, like, that they put on fucking, like, cable on prime time on a Saturday night or some shit on Halloween. Like, it's insane to me, like, the level that they went to for this. This isn't just like, Blair Witch Project, like, getting shown, in a bunch of theaters across the country. And, like, we know that it's not real because you're going to the goddamn movie theater to watch it. Like, it's weird, man. It's a totally different, it's interesting. And I think, I don't know, found footage, I really like it, and when it's done well, it's really effective. But honestly, this takes it to a whole nother level that's, like, totally different than any other found footage, like, horror movie that we can talk about, I think.
The thing with found footage movies that always drives me a little crazy is when I watch these things and there's just no grasp on reality, so that I watch a found footage movie and I just start thinking to myself, well, how did this get edited? Who sat down and put this together? Who did the sound mixing on this? How come there are multiple cameras here? Those are the ones that are always unsuccessful to me, are the ones where I can't find myself inside of the story and I just immediately start asking those questions. And there's too many of those. Was the simple stuff like the VHS movies where I just watch it and I go, well, this was never on a VHS tape. Why are you calling this VHS? They put a VHS tape into a machine. This is not VHS. Why am I watching this? And it just immediately, everything is completely gone. And then I start asking those questions like, who put this together? Who edited this? How come there's multiple things? Who's doing the lighting? All of this kind of stuff. So it takes a lot for me to get invested into a found footage movie, so the ones that do it successfully really stand out for me as being something a cut above the rest, where I'm not second guessing all of these things. And Ghostwatch is one of those. Ghostwatch sets it up so well as far as, here are where the cameras are. We're going to show you. Here's camera 1. Here's camera 2. Here's camera 3. Okay, now we're going to go through the house. Now we're going to talk about the audio. Now we're going to talk about this. And just to set up all of those things is really smart. And yeah, I would say that this falls somewhere between found footage and mockumentary. But again, mockumentary is another one of those things where if they do it right, then you don't question stuff. And Ghostwatch definitely does it right.
Well, and the thing is, and we've talked about this obviously a fair amount now, but with something like Ghostwatch, the conceit is baked into it.
Right.
You have a frame of reference of what this is. Even as Americans, this is a British, a British TV show, a British broadcast. Even as Americans, we understand what this is supposed to be. And my issue has always been with found footage is the conceits are always so goofy because it's just not reality. Like you said, who's editing this? Why didn't TJ Miller put the camera down in Cloverfield? Cue Eric saying, people are going to want to see this. But it's one of those things where the conceits sometimes just don't work at all. And in this, it's baked into it. In the film we watched on the last Kulturecast, The Conspiracy, the conceit gets played with at the end, the thing about who's editing this, which I think works in tremendous fashion. I'm assuming you'd agree with me, Eric.
Oh, yeah, they totally flip it on its head. Yeah, they take something in The Conspiracy where you would think it was working in one direction and they completely flip it and it's working sort of against the initial idea of the filmmakers. And that's one of those movies where, again, like I never questioned like why the cameras were there or how it was edited or why it was shot or like, what these guys were doing or how it was finished. Like I never worried about that because it was all just shown to me. It was all right there. Everything was spelled out without having to like have a title card that said like, that happens in a lot of horror movies is they'll have a title card at the beginning of the movie or at the end of the movie that says like, we found, I think it's actually at the beginning of the Blair Witch Project where they're like, we found X amount of tapes and we edited together, like somebody edited together the footage just to like cut it down for time. Other than that, like we have not tampered with it at all. And then they show you the edited together thing. Like, I know for a fact that's like in a bunch of, like that's in some of the Paranormal Activity movies. It's in Blair Witch Project. It's in a bunch of those movies where I'm just like, okay, so you just edited together hours and hours and hours of footage to like create a narrative. And then like, you're like, oh, but then after that, we didn't touch it. Like we didn't tamper with it at all. So like, here you go. Those, I don't know. Those are like a lot less believable and you really have to like just be on board with the format in general before you even watch those. But I think things like Ghostwatch and things like The Conspiracy, like if you're more skeptical or don't like, the format of found footage, those make it much more believable and much easier to just like go with it and not think too hard about it. The problem with
found footage is we're more accustomed to VHS or Blair Witch or Paranormal Activity or a lot of these movies. Yeah. We're more accustomed to those than Ghostwatch or The Conspiracy or WNUF Halloween Special, which kind of apes Ghostwatch a lot in a good way, in a really good way, but it does kind of the same things in a way, but in a different format. And that's what I find to be most successful about found footage, like we've been talking about, is when it doesn't just play to the conventions straight. And I mean, look at what happened with that Blair Witch movie that came out, 2 years ago? That movie was awful. And it just goes to show you can't replicate that lightning in a bottle success.
I mean, honestly, I think that movie's biggest problem, like not to completely change the subject to Blair Witch from a year ago, 2 years ago? Anyways, whenever it came out, was that movie looked super cool up until they revealed that it was Blair Witch. Like, they should have just left it at whatever the original title was, like when the first trailer dropped for it, and not told anybody that it was a Blair Witch movie until you went and saw it. And if you went and saw it and then like halfway through the movie, they're like, oh yeah, this is about a Blair Witch thing. Or like, I don't know, in the movie, I think it's like 5 or 10 minutes in, they're like, oh yeah, my sister was the one who got lost or some shit. But if you figure out by watching the movie that it's a Blair Witch movie, I think that movie would have been way better. And
it comes back to something like Ghostwatch,
where they just don't tell
Ghostwatch doesn't outright, they don't outright tell you that this is not fake. Or they don't outright tell you that this isn't real. They let you kind of come to the conclusion on your own or completely buy into the idea that it's real. And I think that that's the most successful way to watch this, is to buy into it and not be like, well, I can see the effect, or this effect looks cheap, or something like that. I'm not saying anything does, but just saying that and kind of buying into it, you'll enjoy this more than if you're like nitpicking it for, the effects looking dated or God knows what's, kind of you could pick this up for.
I actually kind of liked some of the badness of this, like when they turn on a light and the auto iris turns on and suddenly it's all blown out and then it comes back down and closes down. It's like, oh yeah, that was part of the deal when it came to some of these cameras. And just like seeing the artifacts of time, I thought was kind of a nice effect to it.
Oh yeah.
and that's the thing. This was made in 92. This isn't like what we're watching next on the next Kulturecast or 2 Kulturecasts from now, WNUF Halloween Special, which is recreating a broadcast from the 80s. This is filmed in the 90s. So like you said, Mike, it's got all those kind of little kind of things that you would expect, and it works in its favor because it's just another drop in the bucket of selling you on what this is. It doesn't look super polished. It's not the high quality production values. It's meant to look this way because in looking that way, it sells exactly what it is.
Yeah, they shot the whole thing like on videotape instead of like on film. And so the aspect ratio is all square and made for TV and not widescreen or anything like that. And it just makes it feel more real. It makes it feel like, shit that was coming out in the early 90s or whatever. Because for all intents and purposes, it is. And it was. Like, it's just because it was fake doesn't mean that, like, they made it fake. Like, they made it like they would make any other TV show, but they just did it with a film crew and did it ahead of time.
Them committing to this 100% is why I love this so much. Like, because they committed to it. Absolute commitment to what they were trying to create. That's why this works so well for me. Is because they really committed to the entire idea, and they didn't have anything that didn't mesh well with trying to create a television broadcast. And that's why this really stands out and stands the test of time, and has kind of bridged the gap and come over to the United States and is on Shudder and was on Shudder's front page last year for like 8 months when they first got it on Shudder, because I think it's something that anyone who's a horror fan should watch, because obviously as an American horror fan, I didn't hear about it until it was on Shudder because it wasn't a thing in this country. We have our own version of this. It was the War of the Worlds broadcast. But this is a different beast entirely, but not in a way that we can't relate to in 2018. I'm not sure I could really relate to the War of the Worlds broadcast in 2018.
Yeah, that would be very
at all.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be tough, but if you could pull it off, like, then hell yeah.
Well, its mediums have changed so much. I mean, and that's the thing too, with this being in 92, I was saying we had a limited number of channels, and it was maybe not that way in the U.S., or definitely starting to not get that way in the U.S. So this was a product of its time as well, as far as in a few years hence, once they started to introduce, cable and satellite and stuff to the UK, you couldn't necessarily do something like this because you had more channels. You lost your audience. It's kind of like, going back to the War of the Worlds, that was the prime time for radio, and that was when radio was the thing, and when there were only so many channels like you could get in at that point. So, you listened to War of the Worlds, or you maybe listened to one or two other things, but the majority of people were tuned into that particular broadcast that particular night. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had any of its power. Because they could do something like this now, throw it on a channel. Who knows if you're going to see it? Especially a live broadcast. Yeah, forget about it.
Oh yeah,
it'd have to be on like Facebook or YouTube or Snapchat.
It would. Yeah,
it would have to be like a live. Yeah, you'd have to do like this is Facebook, like on Facebook Live. And you know what? I think that would be so interesting to see if someone could pull off something like this in 2018 on like Facebook Live. So like you'd have to have like everything kind of ready to go, and like I don't know if you could pull it off. I think it would be a monumental undertaking, but if you did, I think it would be similar to Ghostwatch. People would be talking about it for years to come. They'd be like, holy shit, this is nuts that you could pull this off.
Yeah. It's like, oh my God. Wow.
Well, the other thing to Eric's point, as far as, there was that movie, I don't know if it came out and went already or not, the one called Searching with John Cho, where it's all from like his computer screen and interacting, looking for his kid and stuff. And it's like, this is all shot to look like it's on a computer screen, but yet I'm going to the movies and watching this. It just doesn't.
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For JD Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Makes sense. Like, I don't even want to see that. If I get an opportunity to see it, I don't want to see it on my television set. I would rather sit with it on my screen so it looks like it's my screen and experience that way.
Yeah. It's that movie took the format to a really interesting place, and I want to see more weird things like that.
I want to see them presented as reality.
Right. I want to see them presented on like an actual. Like, make it so that the only way that you can watch it is like on your computer or phone or iPad or whatever. Like, I know that like you want to have a big outing and, you know, it being in theaters and stuff, and you're going to make more money that way potentially and things like that. But maybe there's a different way to do it. You know, maybe you can format it differently to where if you have it as a live broadcast or you have it as something that's, you know, like up on, you know, Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and you can get money different ways, like through advertising or I don't know, however people make money on the internet.
Money after.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
something.
You can have a live broadcast and everything like that, and then maybe afterwards, like people can buy you can buy it from your website or off iTunes or whatever the fuck. But like to have a movie like that and then show it in a format that it's obviously not meant to play on is definitely weird. Yeah. Yeah, like the whole Blair Witch thing is like, I love the Blair Witch Project, and I think it's a great and effective horror movie, and like one of the better like found footage movies of like the last, I don't know, 20 years or wherever, you know, however long it came out. But I honestly think it like suffers from like movie theater-itis. It was like one of those things like where you go and you see it at the movie theater and you know it's not real because you're sitting at the movie theater. And that movie would have been so much scarier if it was like a VHS tape that like got passed around or whatever and copied a bunch of times. And like your friend gave it to you in college and was like, yo, you got to watch this. This shit's crazy. I got it from a friend of my cousin's or whatever. And he says it's real. And then you watched it, like you would have fucking shat your pants. But
and Blair Witch
you can't make money
like
doing it that way. So I don't know.
Because of the budget. So they are laughing all the way to the bank, except for the fact that everyone who was involved with that movie did nothing of value since. So sorry. That's the problem with something like the Blair Witch. I've watched Blair Witch a handful of times, and I don't think it holds up to repeat viewings. Not like this. Not like The Conspiracy. Not like WNUF. I just don't think it holds up. And I think that that's the other thing about a found footage horror movie. And I think that I agree with you, Mike. Just sitting here thinking about it. It should really be more reality horror, not found footage. Because found footage is just, like Eric said, that title card at the beginning. We found this somewhere. Like that's...
And sometimes you can go through so many goddamn backflips to explain yourself, like fucking Chronicle. It's like, really? You can levitate the camera now, and now you're taking the cameras up into the atmosphere when you're flying around like superheroes. They went through so many things to try to make that found footage work through the entire thing.
Yeah, it's a terrible movie.
It's when you have something like this, the conceit makes sense. When you have something like The Conspiracy, the conceit makes sense. When you have something like Cannibal Holocaust, the conceit makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Cannibal Holocaust is a good movie because it's not. It's really not. It's not only do they actually kill an animal on screen, it's also just not a good movie. Like, it's not entertaining. It's boring, and the payoff is...
I mean, I don't know. The payoff is pretty brutal. Like, I think even now, like a lot of the visual effects from that movie still hold up better than a lot of other visual effects I've seen.
When the visual effects are done
shit,
on a shoestring budget, there is something to be said.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's
versus
like,
CGI.
That movie wasn't supposed to be entertaining. It was supposed to be a documentary, and it succeeded in being a boring documentary where like the ending definitely takes a hard left turn.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a movie called The Last Broadcast. It actually came out about maybe 8 months before The Blair Witch, and it was almost the exact same thing. It was like totally a found footage horror movie, and you follow this guy around. Eventually, the guy who's making the documentary ends up, spoilers, being the killer, but it's really effective, and it was one of the first movies to be satellite broadcast to different theaters. They were trying all these different things to kind of make a name, and then it just got shuffled right by when it came to history, and it's like Blair Witch comes out, middle of 99, and nobody ever talks about the last broadcast, but it is so super similar. And then also I wanted to give a shout out to Man Bites Dog, which also uses this whole idea of the making of a documentary and all of these horrible things going on. And that movie is absolutely terrific. It's blood-curdling and hilarious all at the same time, and that was 93. So it was by the time I saw Blair Witch, I was like, okay, I've seen this kind of stuff before. It was still effective and everything. I still remember the image of the kid staring at the corner, but that's pretty much all I remember from that movie is just that one image. So it's like, okay. It was hilarious when I was working at Blockbuster that fall. People would come in, they'd be like, did you see Blair Witch Project? I'd be like, yeah, that was the worst piece of shit I've ever seen. It was just like going off, like it was that effect that you're talking about, Chris, when it comes to the reaction of people who got fooled by Ghostwatch. It was that same thing of like, I got fooled into watching this movie, but it was more like I got fooled because people kept telling me how scary it was, and then they would go see it and they'd be like, it was way too overhyped for them already, and they just didn't see why it was scary.
Well, and that's the thing about Blair Witch that Ghostwatch doesn't suffer from. And I know we've talked a lot about Blair Witch with Ghostwatch, but again, there's no way the people who made Blair Witch had never seen Ghostwatch. I cannot fathom that that's a reality, regardless of how many times the people who made Blair Witch say that that's the case. That's totally not the case. Unless it's, what is that thing about how Amy Schumer claims she didn't steal anyone's jokes, like parallel thinking or whatever lie she came up with to claim that she wasn't ripping people off 100% by saying the exact same thing. They didn't rip off Ghostwatch, but rip off is too strong of a term. With Blair Witch,
was it an homage?
Yeah, what is it? Ripping it off is this imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. With something like Ghostwatch, I think with Blair Witch, the reason that I like people say that is because it's not even really entertaining. This is at least entertaining. This holds your attention for 90 minutes. Blair Witch, there's a lot of shit where it's just like they're just walking in the woods and like one character is screaming at another one. You've got like, and I think it helps that it's this mixed medium where you've got characters going back and forth and like, switching to the studio and then to the house and then to Craig Charles running around on the street. Like you've got this kind of ensemble cast, and I think that also really helps with Ghostwatch kind of not only be effective, but also be unsettling, because you're never really in the same spot for very long, and you're getting to see characters' reactions. That's the thing. Blair Witch exists inside of a vacuum, right? You never get to see your own reaction to Blair Witch. In Ghostwatch, you're seeing Michael Parkinson react to what's going on with Sarah Green in the house. You feel for Mike Smith because that's his wife, and you feel for his character because she is going through all of this in the house, and you're seeing his reaction. But in Blair Witch, it's happening in a vacuum. It's us watching it, and what are we?
No, that's a very good point. And yeah, that back and forth between studio and host, and even the different parts of the studio, the different parts of the house, the little studio that they have, the man on the street reporter who's running across that park and everything. That's really nice that we have so many different places and so many actions from all of these different characters.
When you have like a film like Digging Up the Marrow, another reality horror film, and that movie is successful for the similar reasons that Ghostwatch is. You get to see people's reactions, and in and of itself, that might not seem like much, but it helps sell the reality of this. And it's a lot, and I think it's more fun because it sells the reality. So, well, Mike, what would you give Ghostwatch out of 5?
I'd give it a 4 out of 5.
Eric, what about you?
Damn, solid and decisive answer. Immediate. He knew. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 as well. I think like the only thing holding it back from like being something like singular and perfect, even considering, like the time and, just restraints as to like what you could do in 1992 and make it seem real and like a live broadcast for television. I like if you can somehow just fix the hokiness at the very end of the movie, like with all the cats and shit, and like the wind and stuff. Like, I think other than that, it's perfectly executed. Like I can find very little at fault with this.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. I think it's a lot of fun. It's one of those found footage films, reality horror mockumentaries that I tell people I know who go, oh, found footage fucking sucks. Which, by the way, if you bring up found footage horror to someone, they will undoubtedly say that. And if you're talking about films like Paranormal Activity and the 9 sequels it spawned, I'd be inclined to agree with you. But when you've got these really interesting, fun, genre-bending things like Ghostwatch, I would disagree. Found footage doesn't suck. That's just like saying, oh, action movies suck based off of only watching Steven Seagal action movies.
Oh, man. Those are fighting words against Steve.
Fire Down Below is not exactly an American film classic. So, well, let's take our final break and we'll play a preview for the next Kulturecast.
Testing 1, 2, 3. We're on.
We're here to investigate a patient that killed 3 innocent teenagers on a Halloween in 1978. He was shot by his own psychiatrist and taken into custody that night, and has spent the last 40 years in captivity. Hello, Michael. I have something you might like to see.
Everyone in my family turns into a nutcase this time of year. Yeah, I mean, your grandmother is Laurie Strode. She was almost murdered.
Wasn't it her brother who murdered all those babysitters?
No, it was not her brother. That's something that people made up.
Do you know that I pray every night that he would escape?
What the hell did you do that for?
So I can kill him.
Dad, look out!
The bus crashed.
Mom, what bus crashed?
Michael escaped.
Excuse me, somebody's in here.
Hello?
He's waited for this night. He's waited for me. I've waited for him.
Get out of the room! Get inside!
You don't believe in the boogeyman?
He's here!
Michael! You should.
Can you close the closet door?
That's right. On the next Kulturecast, we are going to be talking about Halloween 2018. Yes, we have to use that moniker now because the films have the same name. Until then, however, what have you been up to, Mike? Where can people find the Projection Booth podcast?
Well, before I get into that, I've just been making a YouTube video where I've been complaining that they use the same title, and now I have to say Halloween 2018 or Halloween 1978, and it's just not fair. It's just not fair.
Well, I can tell you it's easy for you to sleep soundly at night because, little preview for our next Kulturecast, the original is still better.
But now I have to discern it. When people ask me what my favorite movie is, and I say Halloween, and they'll say which one, or they'll think that I mean the 2018 version. I'm going to leave nasty comments.
Blumhouse doesn't hire female directors because he doesn't know that any exists.
You could be talking about the 2007 Rob Zombie masterpiece, Halloween.
Exactly. No.
He's not joking, Mike.
I'm not joking when I talk about the 2009 masterpiece that is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, because that movie is absolutely batshit insane and amazing.
I have yet to have the courage to watch it after watching that first Rob Zombie Halloween. Oof.
It's so much worse. It's so much more brutal and sickening to watch. And then it's weird as fuck on top of it. So it's like everything that the first Halloween movie should have been, but like they just they're like, yeah, fuck it, we'll do it in the second one. It's fine.
We'll do it live.
We'll do it live.
God damn it, we'll do it live. And you know what? Rob Zombie may not be an auteur, but he does know how to make a really grisly horror movie in the vein of like early Tobe Hooper.
True.
Yeah, so much so that the new Halloween movie, in my opinion, the new Michael Myers has taken many cues from Rob Zombie's Michael Myers.
Agreed. So, where can people find you, Mike?
You can find me over at projectionboothpodcast.com, where every GD week, I am putting out a new episode of the show that I've been doing for going on 8 years now, I guess it is. And yeah.
What?
We're in the middle of a Shocktober 2018.
Oh, yeah, brother!
Just about to release an epic discussion of Chinese hopping vampires. And then we wrap things up next week talking about Session 9 with David Caruso.
Ooh, I love Session 9.
It was a lot of fun to put together.
Ooh, Session 9's great. I'm going to have to fucking tune in for that one.
So.
Ooh, you should watch it, and then we can listen to the podcast together.
Oh, wow.
Ooh, in the sauna? I mean, what?
In the sauna.
In the dry sauna.
The sauna that is my pants.
Where can people find you, Eric?
You can find me at the local alcohol dispensing place. Any one of the fine establishments that is by my house. I'm still not on the internet. So yeah, I was so
much so that you were at a mutual friend of ours' wedding, and I didn't even see any pictures of you on Facebook at his wedding.
Yeah, the Facebook algorithm doesn't even know what to do with me anymore because there's no reference material for it to like grab from. So yeah,
you're off the grid.
Yeah, come and find me in real life. We'll have a real life discussion about things that happen on the internet that I don't know about.
Well, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at Kulturestash. You can find out more about the Kulturecast over at Kulturecast.com. You'll find links over to iTunes where you can rate and review the show, which you should totally do, and to Patreon where you can kick a couple dollars our way if that's a thing you want to do. I'm not going to tell you to do it, but we sure would appreciate it. Donors get access to some kind of cool stuff, so you should go check that out. Big thanks to Eric for kicking out a really cool, moody as fuck intro-outro song, and to Mike for joining us for one of two appearances.
I'm looking forward to some WFUN.
Jesus.
Oh, man.
And we'll see you on the next
awesome.
Kulturecast.
Thank you.